Hello, I'm Georgina Heffernan. I'm a former journalist, magazine editor and digital media professional. Welcome to this video lecture. Over my 20-year career in media, I've learned an awful lot about conflict, especially conflict working within creative teams. And one of the things that I can tell you about it, that you probably already know, is that love it or hate it, it's probably going to happen. If you work in a large organisation or even if you're self-employed, you're going to be dealing with conflict on an almost daily basis, be that disagreements around money or working in teams. In our personal relationships, we also have conflict from time to time. So developing the skills to manage disputes is not only an essential business tool, it's an essential life skill as well. In all human relationships, there are going to be difficulties. Yet paradoxically, we have no formal training to deal with conflicts, both big and small, in our daily lives. Now, what sort of a world is it when we get little to no training on one of the most common occurrences we're going to experience in our daily lives? Most people say that conflict makes them feel stressed and uncomfortable, and that's completely understandable. Nobody likes to butt heads with others, but that doesn't mean that you can't handle conflict effectively. And when you deal with it effectively, the positive benefits to your life are immeasurable. The first issue that we're going to deal with is conflict around money. Do you often find yourself losing contracts or working for less than you'd like? And even if you do land a project, do you risk being walked over, disrespected, or working for less than you wanted, or even for free? To address some of these issues, we met with milliner John Shevlin, who's actually created hats for celebrities such as Stephen Fry and even the Irish president. And now he's going to share some invaluable advice with us about how to deal with difficult conversations around pricing and money.
Hi, I'm John Shevlin. I'm a milliner and I make hats. We started off, our history goes back to 1960 when my late father started a small hat factory in Malahide in Dublin. And I worked with him for many, many years, and then I set up on my own, and we have been making hats ever since. I think you have to educate the customer to a certain extent that your product is good, the quality is good, it's handmade, it's made in Ireland. You have an after-sales service if you come back and you want your product freshened up or cleaned or whatever way. That's very important. And I think if you explain to the customer that the materials are at a certain price and you can't change that, most people will recognize the work that you do. Okay, this scenario about pricing, especially when you're dealing with larger companies, wholesale companies, large retail stores and so on and so forth. I think two things: you have to be aware of what the market value is of your product because you're competing with that market as well. But because you're local, and probably because you're local, you can have a quick turnaround with your product. I think you can charge slightly higher than the big the other big makers. If it comes to, I won't say disputing, but discussing a price point, I normally go in as a trade secret. I normally go in knowing that a large company is going to cut a chunk off your bottom line. And I add it on in the beginning. So when I go in, there's a negotiation, and can you, we're going to order so many hats off you, can you do it at a better price? And you kind of say, well, okay, well, because you're ordering a large quantity, we will take 5% off, knowing that they probably want 10%. And I think that's one way of doing it. I think you have to be very firm on your payments because you have bought the material, you've done the work, you've supplied it to the store, hopefully on time or ahead of time, and you expect to get paid. My policy, if people don't pay me or they're very slow in paying, I'm phoning. I allow a certain amount of time. People say it's in the post, that's an old story. I'll allow another few days for postage, and if it hasn't arrived, I will be on the phone again, or emailing as it is now. But generally speaking, most people are pretty good at paying. I'm talking about the stores, shops, retailers that I supply. But nowadays, I've sort of established a policy, and I've stuck to it more or less, by doing pro forma invoice, because I've bought the material and I paid for it already, probably on a pro forma basis. So therefore, I will charge the customer before the goods leave the factory. Another example recently, what I had to do, and I think it's something that needs to be considered. It's the first time I've ever done it, but it worked out fine. I was approached by a new customer in France, promising very big orders, and when it came to actually giving me an order, they gave me quite a large order, a lot actually bigger than I expected. So my outgoing was a bit higher in relation to buying the materials for this order. So because it was a new customer and I hadn't dealt with them before, I proposed what I call a production cost, which is basically 50% of the final invoice. And the customer was happy with that and agreed to it, and so my materials were covered at least. And before the goods were shipped, the balance was paid on a pro forma basis. Another scenario you can come across is where you have made a hat or produced something for a customer, and they might decide that they don't like it, or the colour wasn't what they intended, or didn't quite look like what they wanted. In a case like that, to a certain extent, you have to kind of say, well, the customer's right, the customer knows what they want. And, sometimes you have to accommodate your customer. You have to go that extra mile, as they say. My own policy is, if a customer has a complaint, not a complaint as such, but just doesn't like the hat or didn't seem like the style she wanted, I'll say, let's start again. Let's do another one and try on something else, or change the colour, or we can change that ribbon, or we can do something for it. It may be a bit of extra work, but at the end of the day, it's worth it because you're looking after a customer. And also, I think, it's part of your after-sales service. If something breaks in that link on that piece of jewellery, no quibble, you fix it or you replace it. That's my opinion.
So as you've probably observed from listening to John's insights, conflict with a client can easily occur when communication is unclear, processes are unfamiliar, and expectations are misaligned. Unfortunately, breakdowns in the relationship between a client and a freelancer can happen sometimes. So to protect yourself, should things go wrong, it's really important to get things in writing before you start working on that creative brief. By fully costing and defining any work that you set out to do, you put yourself in a position of strength before you even start. And it's also really good to have things in writing should things be called into question at a later date. Remember, it's much easier to avoid a conflict situation if you can back up whatever you're saying with a signed agreement. But what about working in teams? Conflict is pretty much inevitable when you work with others, and that's because people have different viewpoints, and under the right set of circumstances, those differences can unfortunately lead to conflict. Next up, Damien Handley, a creative director with one of Ireland's most successful advertising companies, in the company of Huskies, shares some great tips about conflict resolution within teams and also effective collaboration.
Hi, my name is Damien Handley. I am the creative director of an agency called In the Company Huskies. My job every day is to get the best out of my team, who are the creative department. What you learn in this business is never to say no, because no is a very negative term. It's a full stop, and what it does is it stops the generation of ideas. So rather than putting the energy into disagreeing with an idea you've seen just presented, you put the energy into trying to build an idea and see where that idea can go and what can be a more positive, constructive answer. And what you learn eventually is how to actually say no to something without saying no. Like, for example, you could simply try, yeah, that's really interesting, but to just build on that, the following. And yeah, I think that's really good for consideration. You just never say no, because no is a hugely negative term and it's a full stop. The main thing to remember sometimes can be a pressurized environment, is always keep a sense of humor. We're not operating on sick kids, we're in advertising, and no one's actually going to die. Humor is one of the most powerful tools that I use to try and keep a good positive atmosphere around the place, because at the end of the day, it's advertising. It's supposed to be a bit of fun. I think the thing with clients is that clients only want one thing, which is they want to know that you care as much about their brand as they do. If they feel that you don't care as much about their brand as they do, that begins to manifest itself in lots of negative ways. They begin to get more demanding, they begin to get less reasonable about time, about costs, and about the work. Because what that is actually saying is, it's like in any relationship, when you're having an argument, the argument is never about the argument, it's about something else. And when you're having a difficulty with a client, what's actually happening is the client, I bet you, the client fundamentally believes somewhere in the background that they don't think you actually care as much about what they're trying to do as they think you should. And if they feel that you have passion and you're invested in what you're trying to do, you'd be amazed at how much the relationship changes, and they become much more understanding about what it is. They try to work with you rather than against you. So it's actually further back in the relationship that you need to work on. It's about really getting invested in your client's brand and actually caring about what they're trying to do. And if the client sees that coming across, they'll forgive you every sin because they know it's ultimately for the best. If something is going a direction which I don't think is the correct direction for either a brand or a piece of creative, again, it's very important to take the subjectivity out of that conversation and try and avoid a situation where it's my word against their word, which very quickly gets into a negative loop. What I try and do is go further back and take a few steps back and have a more general conversation about what it is that we're trying to achieve overall. And that, because if you're having an opinion just about a particular piece of work, it can get very negative very quickly. But if you take a step back down the process and say, what is this client hoping to achieve? What are we hoping to achieve here? And that can somehow be a slightly more freer conversation. And what happens is sometimes is either I discover I'm wrong or they discover they're wrong during that conversation, and the conversation kind of sorts itself out. So it's really good to take a step back and go, what it is that we're trying to achieve here overall? What's this brand trying to do? What are we trying to achieve as an agency? Are we trying to do good work? Are we trying to do mediocre work? And that can be kind of a very liberating conversation. And sometimes people can often answer their own discussion or even end up agreeing with the other person without even realizing it. So I think the important thing to remember in the creative process is that it's incredibly easy to knock an idea. It makes you listen. And that old classic saying, we have 2 ears but 1 mouth, listen twice as much, speak half as much. And just listen to other people as well, because they may have a good point and you may have a lot to learn. I've been in this business 25 years and I'm still learning. And every day I bend to someone else's opinion if I feel it's a better opinion than mine. Because at the end of the day, it's about what's the best idea, not who has that idea. That's the important thing.
As Damien pointed out, listening to others and being open to their ideas is a really important part of working in teams, especially on creative projects when everyone needs to have their voice heard.